Welcome home. We are WNST, Towson, Baltimore. Baltimore positive. Happy summer to everybody out there. For everybody hung over from Foo Fighters and Styx and all these great concerts this week. My anniversaries this week. My mom's birthday's this week. No Crab Cake Tour this week. We're taking a little respite from the Maryland Crab Cake Tour. We're getting back after it beginning on August the 13th. We'll be at State Fair with Angela also Brooks, who's running for senator. Important conversations we should all be having, even up in Pennsylvania where Luke is. But the Maryland Lottery sends us out on the road with the Gold Rush Sevens doublers. We'll have these over at State Fair on the 13th. We'll also be at Fadley's when the Cheatstros, I get to say that for like a whole month. I love that. The Cheatstros come in later on. We'll be at Fadley's for that. I'm wearing my Costas shirt. We'll get the Costas. We're going to get the Cocos. We're going to get the Coopers. We're going to get the Pizza Johns in Essex. If I start to gain weight or look like the chipmunks I feed, it's because I'm eating pineapple and pepperoni and imported ham from outside Essex into Essex, imported onto that pizza at Pizza John's. Our friends at Liberty Pure Solutions, keeping our water crystal clear. I'm drinking from the orange-colored glass, if you haven't noticed, as well as our friends at Jiffy Lube Multi-Care, who keep this guy out on the road. He was so active that he and I have already argued before we even did the show about why he didn't go to the Foo Fighters show on Tuesday night. He's like, I'm working, dude. Owings Mills. It's 87 degrees and there's clouds. And then the Marlins game's on, and I got to watch that. And they didn't even send their A-team. No disrespect to Dave Johnson, who knows I love him. But they, it's summertime, dude. Go enjoy a beer. Go see the Foo. Go see Styx. Go see Sammy Hagar. Go do something, man. I know you're saying I ate a lot of pizza last week. I swallowed a lot of aggression and a lot of pizza is what you're going to tell me.
Well, I was going to say, it feels like that's been the Orioles mentality of late. And I mean, ugly, listless, lethargic, lackadaisical effort on Tuesday night, or showing at the very least. Base running mistakes. I thought the Colton Cowser being thrown out at third play kind of felt like a pivotal moment where he beats out the ball at first. And it's like, okay, maybe this gets them going. And then he makes the third out at third just moments later. But
run the bases until they throw us out.
Yeah,
That's a little
yeah. I mean, and let's start. I mean, Albert Suarez wasn't good. He was very good in the first inning, so you thought, okay, maybe the long layoff's not an issue for him. And that's always the challenge when you're talking about the back half of your rotation with the All-Star break, because you want to reset things. You get Burns and Grayson Rodriguez going right off the bat, and that worked well in Texas. They won the first two games, but then those 3, 4, 5 starters have sat around a little bit longer with the break. But Suarez looked good in the first inning. Four-seamer looked good, and then relied on it way too much after that and got knocked around. So just ugly effort. We've talked about this. I mean, this is a Miami team that is not good. This is a team that maybe didn't have expectations to be in the postseason again, as they, were kind of a Cinderella team last year that got swept by the Phillies. But certainly a team that expected to be better than 30 games under 500 going into July 23rd. But it's Major League Baseball. And if you don't pitch well, and if you make mistakes and you're lackadaisical defensively and on the bases, then you're going to get beat. I mean, it's not that complicated. And, we've talked about this for the Orioles, going back to before the All-Star break. I mean, this is a team that since that Yankee series, I think they're 11-15 now, which isn't disastrous, but it's bad. Like, it's not, it's a bad month of baseball. And we've talked about this when they had the first 5-game losing streak, and you felt like, okay, they've righted themselves now. And then they have another 5-game losing streak. So doesn't mean the sky is falling, but it does mean you need to play better baseball. And I think it's going to start with talking about now Chase McDermott, who is going to make his major league debut. And I'm fascinated to see how he's going to look. This is a guy who strikes out a ton of batters at the AAA level, but he also walks quite a few at the AAA level. So for me, I'm viewing him through a lens of kind of how we looked at DL Hall a couple years ago. Remember that, and this was 22 when the Orioles in August, they were in wild card contention. It felt unbelievable at the time, but obviously the things had shifted for them and they had turned the corner. But they gave him a start, and then we saw DL Hall kind of transition into a bullpen role for the rest of that year. Same thing happened last year, although last year certainly he dealt with some health issues. But my point is not that Chase McDermott is the same exact kind of pitcher. Obviously, he's a right-hander. DL Hall is a lefty, but I think he's someone who could be a factor for them in some capacity the rest of the way if he shows an ability to miss bats and if he can curtail the walks a little bit. And he has shown some progress in that at the minor league level, but at the same time, you're still talking about someone who's averaged just north of 5 walks per 9 innings. So that's high. So is he going to profile as a starter the rest of the way? Is he going to remain on the major league roster? That remains to be seen, but I do think he's got the stuff to factor in some way, and that might be in a bullpen role as we get later into the season, in the same way we talked about DL Hall, or in the same way that Tyler Wells potentially was going to factor in. So I'm intrigued to see him. Obviously, we're less than a week away from the trade deadline at this point, so that's all systems go on that as far as what's going to happen and who are going to be buyers, who are going to be sellers around the league. There's still so much unknown as it pertains to that. And as much as there's talk about Tarek Skubal, I still, if you're asking me to bet, if you're asking me to wager, it's probably not going to be that dynamic of a move. But I think it's obvious at this point they need a spark, whether it's a minor league guy coming up, whether it's McDermott, whether it's Connor Norby, who looks like he's going to be coming up, with the ugly injury with Jorge Mateo. You hope for the best for him, but kind of difficult to envision him not at least missing a little bit of time here. So we'll see with Norby. We've talked about Kobe Mayo, Jackson Holiday. So there are internal options in addition to the trade deadline. But when it comes back to it, I mean, they just need to start playing better baseball. Brandon Hyde talked about it after the game and his comments that he didn't mince words. He thought they played pretty poorly. And he said that we just need to get back to playing better baseball that we haven't played over the last few weeks. So again, it's late July. They're 20 games over 500. They're in first place. The Yankees lost again on Tuesday night. But at some point in time, you get tired of uttering the best thing about this baseball team, going for this baseball team right now, is that the Yankees are really struggling too, because it just feels like a missed opportunity, and certainly another disappointment Tuesday night.
Luke Jones joining us here. He'll be out in Owings Mills and at Camden Yards this weekend when the Padres get in. All of his reports brought to you by Royal Farms, of course, and the coffee, the fried chicken. It's Chicken Palooza. I don't need to tell you. If you're listening to the station, or if you're at Baltimore Positive, I mean, it's tailgate season too. So, I mean, for concerts and stuff. So, it's Chicken Palooza. Couple things. I mean, I'm making notes here. I mean, I never missed the opportunity to call them the first place Orioles, even though you're calling them what was it, 11-7, 11-7, what's it, 11-15, 11-15 right now, right?
11, yeah.
Okay,
11 and 15 since then. Yep.
11-15 was a good month for 15 years around here. That that was 420 baseball. It wasn't, 370 baseball. But so I would just say this on McDermott and on anybody that profiles a certain way, where you're like, walks guys. And then when they get here, they do the same thing. You know what I mean? Whether it's Fuji, whoever it is, wherever you're profiling elsewhere, I think coming into the kettle of this, and the kettle of this is full ballpark, vibrancy, giving away hats this weekend, Manny Machado's in, like all that. That's one vibe. And then there's, speaking of Mr. Miami, then there's the vibe down in Little Havana, in that, I went to every ballpark before they open Atlanta, and I'm going to get to it. I'll get to Atlanta, but I've been to all the ballparks in Major League Baseball, including Oakland, including Tampa. I'm trying to think of places that are perceived as not being any good, right, or just being lousy. South side of Chicago, which there's a statue of my name on it there, so that has a special place. That puts it in the top 10 no matter what. Elotes alone put it in the top 10. But for me, with where all of this is and how bad it is, we mentioned the Athletics and we see Tampa a lot. Dude, Florida baseball, PU, like just in a general sense of when you were a baby and I was beginning my show back in 91, 92, Florida baseball, there's Cubans, there's Latin, there's people that look like me, there's Venezuelans, there's Wade Boggs, there's Fred McGriff. There's Doc Gooden and Daryl Strawberry and Florida and Vero Beach and Dodger Town, and everybody loves baseball. Everybody plays baseball. You can play it 13 months a year. Like all of that. And 30 years in, they can't give it away. And it's awful. And it's in a blimp. And they put it somewhere where nobody wants to put it. And like, I'm watching this. And I'll say this because my wife and I were like just talking and watching the game. And I love Ben McDonald, by the way. Like, it, even when the game's awful and the team's awful, trying to figure out Ben's Cajun. If I ran Masson, I'd be doing some sort of Cajun promotion with him. But I'm watching this. Like, you got to manufacture your own energy when you go down there. And more than that, it's just all of it. As bad as the Angelos thing was here, the whole play of putting that stadium where they did, building this blimp, how awful all of it was, how dirty all of it was civically with money and all of that stuff. And it didn't even work. Derek J. And then you go down there and you play, and the team's listless. It's part of the vibe there, right? That you were going to go down there, hang out on South Beach, hang out at the Clevelander and come over there and get skunked by their baseball team. Miami Marlins. That's all I wanted to say. But back to the pitching side, the McDermott thing, and bringing in new guys, new guy in the bullpen. We're trying to learn. I'm Googling these guys, figuring out who these guys are. They're doing things. You know what I mean? The outfield thing, just all of these different outfielders and trying all of it. Not any of it's really like worked outside of the Santanders. I mean, O'Hearn is still this sort of project guy that's always hitting 280 and always there when he plays in situations. They have so much going for them, and they're trying. And I think the scrutiny over the next week of the trade thing and every new pitcher, every Povich, every Kerstad, every Stowers having to come and be what Kowser was for a month. At least that you said a spark. They're trying. I mean, they're really trying in a situation where you have to spark yourself in Miami.
Yeah, I mean, and look, when they're cycling through internal options and they've made some waiver claims and things of that nature. And look, I mean, a couple of those guys look good in the bullpen on Tuesday night. Is that an answer moving forward? No, of course not. I mean, but at the same time, they acquired Jacob Webb right around this time last year, and that's worked out pretty well. Now, he struggled at the very end of last season, and he struggled when he pitched in October. Lots of guys struggled against the Rangers, so you can't use that as the final judgment. But we'll see about these guys. But I think so much is on the trade deadline. So much attention is on, okay, when is Jackson Holiday coming back? Connor Norby appears to be the move if Mateo's going on the IL, as was, trickled out there with some reports late Tuesday night. Kobe Mayo has been talked about a lot. I've even talked about Kobe Mayo, even in a scenario where you come up with some trade where maybe you trade Ryan Mountcastle. I don't know. And just talking about the creativity and the potential for all kinds of different trades. And I was just reading something on Tuesday talking about the demand. There's always demand for pitching every year, right? I mean, bullpen, starting pitching. Of course, everyone, contenders or anyone who fancies themselves as contenders, there are very few teams out there that view themselves as buyers that aren't looking to add pitching. So that's a given. But, and I'll continue to remind of this over and over and over, and you've heard me say this how many different times this year. Offense is so down around baseball collectively that there's a lot of demand for bats out there. And look, I get it. The Orioles offense over the last month or so has not been as good as it had been prior to that, but it is still a much deeper lineup than most lineups you find in baseball right now. So that's where I've said, is there a match? Is there a partner where something like that can be done? But
Well, there's 15 guys that they want to play, and there's 9 spots for them to play on most nights. And some guys that are positionless, or you don't want to give them a glove, or you don't want to play them against the right-hander or left-hander, right, situationally. And then there's some guys you don't want to run into the ground, like Rutschman. So you have all of these pieces that you're trying to component together. And I wrote this down at the top of my order of things I wanted to talk to you about today, because, I see some of the scuttlebutt on the internet and out on the goofball must site. in regard to how many outfielders and who's going to be involved in this trade and who's untouchable and who's not. You and I have speculated. People can go listen to that out in our audio vault or anywhere we do what we do. On Monday morning, we woke up and talked about all of that. But the outfield itself and the outfielders and everything you and I talked about in April and May, not that they wouldn't be in first place and sort of slumping in July. They are, right? Not that they couldn't be a World Series team or, a 5-time champion in the next 6 years. They can. All of that's still, as Brian Billick once said, it's still out there for you if you want that. But the things we talked about for stability for them in April and May, and the things you and I'll talk about in November about the Ravens when they're 9-3 or what, wherever, when they're on that pathway, is to say you're trying to set the team up now for October, and you've given Mullins chances. You've given Hayes chances. You've given Santander chances, and you just went to the all and you've given Mountcastle good opportunities, and you've given O'Hearn his best chance to be productive. Like, you've done all of these things, and I still don't know for you and me, as we're like, well, we'll see about Kowser, and well, we'll see about Stowers. We're going to give Kerstad a chance because he's going to get healthy, and we're going to give him a glove, and I still don't know who I'm betting on. To your point, who's the next Jordan Westbrook? Who's the next is? And this is an homage to one of my first listeners whose name was Maurice. And he would call in 1992, 93, 94. And we talk about Jeffrey Hammonds and Alex Ochoa when you were a little boy, Luke. And he'd always say, you always take an is over a might be. And which I'm choosing is. I don't know who the is. And I had Maury Brown on this week, so I want to promote the fact that I've had my mafia on this week. All the smartest baseball business people I know, people I can really talk about stadium leases and Rubenstein and trading deadline. Eric Fisher is on this week. Todd Radom came on this week, the fashionista from Philadelphia. I might be having a cheesesteak with him this week up in Philly. But I had them all on, and, we're like talking about all of these issues in and around baseball, including the awful uniforms at the All-Star game, like all of these things that came up. But I had to laugh because I brought it up. I'm like, they're talking about Scooble, and this leads into that. We're meandering because it's fun to meander. It's like a barroom conversation we're having because it's so much fun because they're in first place and they're awful because they're 11-15, but they're great because and Corbin Burns comes out and it's awful when nobody's watching them play, and then they'll come home this weekend. There'll be 150,000 people down there because there will be, and that's awesome. That shows the growth that they're into. But the Scooble deal, I've seen Holiday and Kerstad involved in that as like bait. And I'm thinking to myself, that is 2 years where you lost every conceivable game you could lose just to get that player. You finished awful, and you're giving all that away for a number one starter, if that's what you believe you're getting, and you're getting him, but like, I'm like, wow, like that's like giving up Ed Reed and Ray Lewis, don't do that. I don't know where the value in all this is, but this is the week we get to have a little fun and laugh a little bit about it. But I watched how bad you have to be to get the number one pick in the draft and how you value it and if you really believe in Jackson Holiday. But boy, if they dealt him, it would say they don't believe in him as much. And that would be weird too. I don't – we really get the cards on the table this week as to where they want to go with a lot of things, especially with new ownership.
Yeah. And I still have a really, really difficult time believing they're going to deal Jackson Holiday. I just think you still look at where he is. And look, this season hasn't gone to plan for him. That's stating the obvious in terms of just the weirdness of spring training and then sending him down and then calling him up after 10 games and then sending him down after he struggles, albeit struggles mightily. And then he has that a little bit of that dead elbow issue, just with throwing, which isn't unheard of. I still haven't heard any whisper that there's concern about his elbow structurally. I think it was just something that can happen to an infielder from time to time, especially a young infielder. But you look at his numbers and you still remind yourself that he's 20 years old and he's still one of the absolute best players at AAA at age 20, even with what he's gone through this year. And you remind yourself and say, are we really going to make a swiping judgment on him after what was it, 30 some plate appearances over 10 games. I mean, that's nothing. That's nothing in terms of a sample. And in the same way that after 30 plus plate appearances, you're not putting him in the Hall of Fame either, if he hits 500 over that time. So I still have a very, very difficult time believing they're going to deal him. I still think they really, really don't want to deal Kobe Mayo or Samuel Basallo. And after that, I mean, there's lots on the table. And there's, by the way, lots of really good prospects still on the table there.
And by the
Okay,
way, when you say you don't want to deal those guys, I want to point out, I just want to be interruptive and say that's an economic issue for a small
sure.
market team. That's an economic issue. That isn't, we love Jackson Holliday and he's going to the Hall of Fame. It's we're getting him on the cheap for 5 years. Not that he's just a great player, because so's Scooble. And he's going to start opening day for you. He's going to be starting game 2 for you. Like, like you're going to go into the playoffs nasty if you have him. Like really, for real, like front line, we're not BSing, but you have to give to get. And that's part of the history of baseball on both sides of the deal. And not just for Holiday, for Mayo, for Kerstad, for any of these names that are in the words of Maurice, who I still hope is with us. I mean, it was 32 years ago. It's been 25 years since I've heard from Maurice. But if anybody knew him, he was a blind listener who called in and used to come in the studio with me all the time and talk sports with me. But you always take an is over a might be. Holiday still a might be. Scooble's an is. And I like, and I know we love our prospects, and this organization pimps this, and Baseball America pimps it. And anybody in my baseball mafia would say the Orioles are, I don't say far and away, but they have the most to give, and they have the most to earn, and they have the most at stake. And the stakeholders, us and Katie Griggs coming in to run this with Greg Bader and TJ Brightman and all the people that have been waiting and waiting and waiting, they feel like they deserve a Tarek Skubal too, and or whatever, whoever it is. But I would say, much like you, and I've dipsticked the community. I was out at Sammy Hagar the other night, went down to DC the Pretenders. I've been out, I read things, I talk to people. People's expectations aren't high because I think they would think that if giving up Holiday would be too much, probably giving up Mayo, given, what Mountcastle has been. And so that power bat, a guy that can hit 30, 35 home runs, I think they would be more inclined to stand pat and say, we'll just pitch Dean Kramer or whatever they do, whatever the Lyles, we've gone through this. Gibson, whatever that middling. I hope it's not Jack Flaherty, but I think we're not expecting that would be blockbusterish for me if they,
Sure.
right? I mean, in any way, but just getting him's going to cost something. And I think that's been the argument on the internet to say, wow, cost us a lot to get Holiday and Kerstad. And they're on the cusp of us giving them that chance to be Jordan Westberg. Look at Ortiz. We can go through all of this. But it's fun to talk about this. It really is.
Well, no question about it. And to your proposition, and you talked about this, and look, I don't disagree with the all prospects are suspects kind of mindset. At the same time, Jackson Holiday's not a typical prospect. He's not even a typical top prospect in a team system. This is the kind of prospect who has a profile. I'm not saying he's going to be this, but he has the profile of someone who becomes a multi-time All-Star, someone who becomes another Gunnar Henderson, quite frankly.
Untouchable
I
for
mean,
any
that's
organization. Yes.
it's tough. It's tough, and that doesn't mean those guys are never dealt, but it's very rare when when that magnitude of a prospect is dealt, and that's what I point out. And look, one of the points that I think has been brought up, even going back to last year with the whole Dylan Cease thing at this time last year, and ultimately the White Sox held on to him and dealt him in the offseason. But there was a sentiment out there that because the Orioles have such a deep system that is very top heavy, but they have those three elite of elite prospects, and then let's face it, the Orioles second and third tier prospects are other teams' first tier prospects, in their systems. So uh, you don't want to artificially give up too much, but at the same time, all these teams are trying to get more from the Orioles because they know they have it, right? I mean, it's kind of, it's, it's going to a casino and, the guy with the high chip stack walks to the table and you think he's a sucker playing cards, right?
But
You're,
Mike's
you're
stingy, right? You found that out
sure,
last year.
sure,
But they also came up short with Flaherty, right? I mean, they
sure.
came up short in a general
Yeah,
sense, not just because of that, but it was a contributing factor that if that that deal would have been a horse, if that deal would have been Corbin Burns, in the middle of that, and would have come in and looked like Corbin Burns for 2 months and pitched like Corbin Burns in October, maybe their fate would have been different if they forced a game four. You know what I mean? Like
yeah.
you,
I
you
mean,
never
well,
you that's the part of it that's so subjective and then objective once October turns around and you're like, where are we then? Not where are we July 26th.
sure, sure. And I mean, you look at that. I mean, the Orioles get Jack Flaherty, the Rangers got Jordan Montgomery. And look at how that paid dividends for them. So, I mean, so much of it's just so difficult to predict. But I want to go back to something you said, because this is where I think some of the Orioles' plight rests right now. You made the comment about someone who is an is compared to someone who is a might be. And I think the Orioles internally are dealing with some of that specifically in the outfield right now because you have, other than Anthony Santander, who is a pending free agent, mind you. So there's that factor. But
Yeah, he's this close to being a used to be here.
right,
You're gonna have to
exactly.
go pay him, and then you're gonna go to market and say, "Well, we'd rather just put Kerstad out there, or whomever, right next year,
Sure, sure.
right?"
And look, I'm not sitting here banging the table saying you must re-sign Santander. At the same time, you're talking about someone who might hit 40 plus home runs this year. So how easily do you replace that? It's the same thing with the Ravens, right? I mean, okay, you didn't want to pay Jadeveon Clowney what he got. Fine. I don't disagree with that, but you still need to replace that production somehow. So that's part of the issue.
Well,
But
this is the economic part for me, where when you deal Mayo, you deal Holiday, you deal any of these guys, when you're paying Gunner 43 million and you're paying Rutschman 38 million in 2027, 28, you need these guys to be producing the way Gunner is now and all-star level, and you're paying them nothing.
sure.
That's how this has to work. That's why it's working for the Ravens, and I know you're out there, while Marlon Humphrey stinks for the most part, and I'll say that because he doesn't have to look at me anymore. And Ronnie Stanley's over some kind of hill and took a pay cut, and we're questioning Derrick Henry, but Kyle Hamilton is giving them that kind of productivity that Lamar Jackson gave them for a couple of years. The Orioles are getting into that phase in a different kind of economic model where this week is a game changer if you start to deal those guys off into 2 and 3 and 4 years when the Ortizes and 3 and 4 more of those aren't there anymore. And Santander says, "Yeah, I'll hit 40 home runs for you, but it's going to cost you 20 million next year." Sort of that Nelson Cruz thing where he was so good he priced himself out.
Right, right. So you have Santander who's in that category. And again, we'll have time to talk about that, whether that's going to happen or not. I'm more open to something that's sensible with him. Let's be clear, I'm not giving him a Chris Davis 6 or 7 year contract. I mean, I'm not doing anything close to that. But Cedric Mullins, a couple years ago was an is, right? I mean, made the All-Star team, 30-30, first time in Orioles history. Look at where he's been over the last year plus. He's not really an is anymore. I mean, he is
It's a
because he has
30-30 guy. If he would have walked into free agency at that point in his career, what would he have gotten in the market?
I mean, he would have
4 years, 80 million?
he would have gotten a big now he didn't have a long pre-existing track record prior to that, but he would have gotten paid. Sure, sure. But you have him, Austin Hayes, who was an all-star a year ago. Look where he is. So even if you're holding on to Jackson Holiday, Kobe Mayo, and Basayo, so those are the big three. Those are the top three prospects in their system who've, Holiday, other than his cup of coffee, those three guys haven't seen extensive action in the major leagues, of course. So even if you're moving beyond them, you look at someone like Colton Cowser and you say, all right, Colton Cowser hasn't really figured it out just yet. He's hits for some power, has played good defense. I think that's something that has very much improved from where he was last year when he got called up. But still a lot of swing and miss. That's still the part of his game that is problematic. A lot of swing and miss, and just not being consistent enough. But you look at him, you look at Mullins, and they're not the exact same profile, but they're a similar profile in terms of you're really not wanting to play them a whole lot against left-handed starting pitchers. But, Cowser has shown he can actually play a center field. And oh yeah, he has how many more years of club control after this one? 5. Cedric Mullins has 1. And, it, so you look at that, there's just one example. I mean, we've talked about it with Austin Hayes. Ryan Mountcastle has done very, very little with the bat since about Memorial Day. Go look at the numbers since then. He's actually been one of their worst hitters. So,
and he's Dave Kingman when it goes bad.
Yeah, I mean, you love him when he's got those. I mean, he's the guy, kind of bat who is capable of absolutely carrying you for 3 weeks, and we've seen that. I mean, go back to earlier this year. I mean, last year he had that 9 RBI game against Oakland, I think it was, in last April or last May, whenever it was. But we've also seen him struggle and really struggle for weeks at a time. So you look at him, and in contrast to Kobe Mayo, who is an unknown, but he's put up way bigger numbers than Ryan Mountcastle did at AAA. And you look at him, probably, I know he still plays a lot of third base, but I still think probably profiles best as a first baseman long term. I don't know that for certain, but I think Mike Elias would probably heal to that and acknowledge that. So you have this conflicting dynamic of your major league roster that, yeah, you want to augment and add pitching, but at the same time, you have all these guys, which, by the way, it doesn't mean that the prospects, just because they haven't popped just yet, are failures. And it doesn't mean that the veterans who have scuffled are completely over the hill. But if you're Michael Elias, you don't want to deal the wrong guy, right? You don't want to be in a position where suddenly you deal a Colton Cowser, and then you're looking for a center fielder because Cedric Mullins, finishes off the year on a sour note, and he's a non-tender candidate probably if he finishes the year the way he's hitting right now. But because
we've watched guys leave here and succeed. Arrieta, Gausman. I mean, there've been guys, now they're not outfielders, right? But we've seen guys leave here and excel in certain ways.
Sure.
This has just been a different class of players, I think, from the hearts of the fans here, to have these players be here in sort of the way that, I don't know, a J.J. Hardy and a Cruz could be imported 10 years ago. But I think the feeling was, and even Adam Jones was imported from a minor league standpoint. But, these were homegrown guys, and guys that were out there scuffling and doing well in the case of Mullins and then Hayes, that, who are you married to here? And these young guys, to your point, like Colton Cowser, feels like we've waited a long time on him. No, dude, they have him for 5 years. Like, he's a blue chip prospect. Do what the Royals did. Stick them all out there and let them all play, and maybe they'll turn into Lorenzo Cain and turn into Moustakas and turn into Hosmer, because we would have been talking not so good about those guys. Probably in the way right now that when I talk trade deadline with everybody, they talk about Vladimir Guerrero, and they talk about the give me the kid, the Rockies kid, Bichette. Up in Toronto. They're a failure there in the way that if next year Gunnar Henderson's hitting 210 and can't figure it out, and Rutschman gets injured and can't do this and can't do that, like, it all falls apart quickly. Ask the Cubs, ask the Royals, ask any of them. And this is really sensitive this week, because dude, I've been doing this a long time. They've never had this problem of having either hyperinflated feelings about their own prospects, but why wouldn't they when they're lottery picks? Why? Anyone would feel good about Colton Cowser. Anyone would feel good about Heston. They all felt good about them that when they drafted them. They're on the cusp of the major leagues. They all have all of these plus assets, even if you don't like their glove, or you don't like the way they hit a left-hander, or you can't figure out whether they're a first baseman or third baseman. They are all going to hit the ball. They're all going to show up. They all know the Oriole way, the new Oriole way. They've all been integrated into analytics and growth mindset and all of that. They would be an asset to your organization in most cases, and probably really tough on the Orioles to give up on any of these guys, because and I'm not around it. This is, again, I'll talk to Jennifer Grandal and them, but if I knew more about these guys and how they all felt, and how, I have no idea how internally they really feel about these guys' maturity, how they're handling things, why they send them down to the minors, what they're working on, what the internal skinny is on players. And sometimes we found that out from John Harbaugh and off the records and this and that, how he feels about a certain alignment or a certain safety or a certain whatever. But in the organization for the Orioles, it feels like all of these young men have come through the system and have tinkered and have earned an opportunity to at least come up and get some major league at bats. And now they have to like figure out Sig Mejdal, their hand.
Yeah.
And this is the week to figure that out and say who's a pile diver and who's a guy that, yeah, I mean, we like him. He's a good him. We wouldn't be shocked if he's a good ball player, but we need that other guy. We need that. We need that relief pitcher. We need that other guy right now because we're in first place. And I don't care if his name's Jackson Holiday or Mayo or whatever. If he's not helping us win in October, we need to win in October. And there's more urgency in my mind and probably in the mind of Elias, maybe not in Rubenstein. I don't know, for all of them to say, let's give it our best opportunity this year instead of going in with Jack Flaherty.
Yeah. And I still think some of this, because you rattled off some names. I noticed one name you didn't even mention was Kyle Stowers. And I think and this goes back to what I was saying a few minutes ago, that you have such a deep system, and specifically you have those three top prospects right now, in Holiday, Mayo, Basayo, whatever order you want to put them, Holiday first and the other two, rank them, one and two, however you want. But everyone's gunning for those guys. Everyone wants those guys. Everyone covets those guys. It's like seeing $100 bill on the street, across the street, lying on the ground. But there's a $20 bill right there at your feet that Stowers and some of these other guys absolutely can be. I mean, Kyle Stowers, I still think has a chance to be a good everyday major league outfielder. He's been blocked here. He's been in a position where he hasn't gotten extensive opportunities. Now, he struggled when he's had some chances, albeit limited ones. But my point is, all these teams are looking across the street and they see these $100 bills that the Orioles have, and they want those, right? Even if there are 20s or 50s that they might be able to obtain much more easily. And I just think there's some of that going on. I think there's some perception, and there was probably a little bit of this that went on even with Joey Ortiz, right? I mean, Joey Ortiz was a fringe, at least top 100 prospect. Didn't play much for the Orioles last year, of course, but
clearly blocked. And that's where Basayo is clearly blocked. Mayo not blocked. But please take some of these outfielders. I'm just not sure which ones.
Yeah. See, I would disagree a little bit about Basayo, because 2 years from now, I mean, Adley Rutschman, for one thing, is not going to be as far away from free agency, but we're also seeing the kind of split. James McCann plays quite a bit. I see that much more as an opportunity where you have two premium bats at the catcher position, where Rutschman could DH, Basayo could DH, either one of them could play first base. So I hear what you're saying on that, though. And look,
if he's the piece in a Skubal deal, it wouldn't shock me.
That wouldn't shock me.
Because they would step forward and just say, look, we already have a catcher and we're trying to win the World Series right now. He's a great player. He's going to go out there and he'll catch in Detroit for the next 5. And he'll be competing with Rutschman for an All-Star game. We know that, but we want to win the World Series.
Sure. Well, but again, I'll keep going back to with even getting Tarek Skubal's not guaranteeing you of the World Series. I mean, I'll continue to keep throwing out there. Look at the postseason.
They can't win the World Series this week. Come on, Lucas. You know that.
Of course they can. Of course they can. But I'm with you on that. And Basayo's 19 still. There's still some development to be done there. He's at Bowie. Look, he's not that far away from the majors, but
the Tigers would be able to crow around and say we're going to have a starting catcher when he's 21.
Sure.
Right?
Sure,
like literally.
Sure. So, and again, if there is a Skubal deal to be made, I think that feels like that would be the most plausible pathway that the Orioles would probably be willing to do, right?
Pick an outfielder. Pick any of the outfielders.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying that's all it's going to be, but again, Basayo's a pretty special prospect. I mean, that's pretty unique. He's not Adley Rutschman. He's not Adley Rutschman great in terms of perception as a prospect, but he's not far off of that, and probably some more intriguing upside because of how young he is. I mean, Adley Rutschman was, out of college. I mean, this is a young kid, so there's so many possibilities. But I want to go back to you were kind of talking about the major league roster, and one point I hear a lot of fans make on social media, and look, it is a fair sentiment, it's a fair comment to make, but I hear fans say, I just want Brandon Hyde to put his best nine out there every night. To which my reply is, what is their best nine right now? And that's where I'm a little, look, first base, you know, Mountcastle and O'Hearn. Mountcastle hasn't hit the ball much at all over the last 6 weeks. I feel great about Gunnar Henderson, no duh, right? MVP candidate. Adley Rutschman's in the lineup every day. So there's two. Jordan Westburg, there's three. Anthony Santander, there's four. I mean, you start to move beyond Ryan O'Hearn. If it's a right-handed starter, he's in the lineup, right? And he's been consistent. And, he's one of the few guys who had a good night on Tuesday night. But, Colton Cowser, I like his defense. His bat sometimes is good, and other times he strikes out way too much. And, you know, Austin Hayes, Cedric Mullins. I mean, Heston Kjerstad of late. Yeah, I want Heston Kjerstad in there, but it's not because of a proven track record. It's because some of these other guys aren't performing.
Dude, he wasn't even on the team a month ago, right?
Right. So, and this, this kind of brings us, and we haven't talked too much about this. I mentioned it in passing, but Jorge Mateo, kind of an ugly looking injury there. The initial x-rays negative. That doesn't mean that there's not a legit injury there, because he's going to have an MRI. They're going to go through tests. But look, Mateo, from the time he went on the concussion list, remember, we were talking about how well he had played over the first 2 months, how that had been such a saving grace with holiday struggles. He hasn't hit since he's come back. And I'm just stating the facts there. I mean, he just hasn't hit. The numbers speak them for themselves. So I hate to see him go down with an injury, and certainly don't want to see a long-term injury, because I think even if Mateo moves much more into a bench role when and if Jackson Holliday or Kobe Mayo are up here, you still want him in that role as a pinch runner, as a backup shortstop, because who's their backup shortstop if he goes on the IL? Yeah, Jordan Westburg can play there, but, it's not Gunnar Henderson there. So, you hope that there's not a long-term absence there, but part of me does wonder if that forces the Orioles' hand here then to mix things up here a little bit. And, it's Norby for right now, but I assume if Jorge Mateo is out for the next 6 weeks, and again, that's just hypothetical, then we're going to see Jackson Holliday very soon. I'm assuming that's going to happen because he is playing second base again for Norfolk and all that. So, I do wonder if, and that's why going back to Chase McDermott at the beginning of our conversation, you're looking for someone to give you a spark. You're looking for a couple guys to give you a spark. And obviously the trade deadline, you're hoping you're going to get more than a spark. You're hoping some fireworks are going to be made, and you're going to be excited about, bringing in another starting pitcher, bringing in another high leverage reliever if you can do it. So, we'll see how it plays out. All the angst we just expressed and all the uncertainty we just expressed, I'll continue to remind, this team's 60-40. This team's tied for the best record in not baseball, but in the American League. They're still in first place. They're still a team that a lot of other teams and fan bases around baseball envy. They are not a perfect outfit by any stretch of the imagination. And yes, they need some more pitching, but the sky is not falling, and this is not push the panic button time either. Even after an 11-15 stretch, 11-15, not 6-22, it's not that dire straits. So they've got to start playing better. And I want to see the energy and focus look a little bit better. I think Brandon Hyde, that you could tell he didn't like how they played Tuesday night, not just because they lost, but just it looked inferior in terms of just the way they played. So they've got to get back to that. But this is also a team now that has a 2-year track record worth of playing baseball at a high level. July of 2022, they were playing really good baseball from that point on. So I'm still going to give them the benefit of the doubt that they're going to climb out of it in that way. And we're going to see what the trade deadline looks like. We're going to see who gets recalled. It's going to be interesting, because I definitely think what this roster looks like now, come a week from now, and certainly a month or two from now, has the potential to look very different than it does right now. And that's saying something for a team that's been as successful as they have been playing 600 ball this year, even after the last month where they've struggled.
Oh, I remember you and I driving around Sarasota, and the big argument was who was going to be the last guy on the roster on opening day. And, the roster changes, and the headline to this one will be Orioles need a spark, saith Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke out on the interwebs. You can follow him anywhere social media happens. You can follow him out to Owings Mills onto the backfields, where I'm hoping the temperatures stay under 90 degrees out there for him chasing John Harbaugh and those guys around. You'll hear a bunch of sound, all of it brought to you by our friends at Royal Farms, as well as Wise Markets, bringing all these wise conversations your way. A lot of baseball this week. A lot of my baseball mafia coming on. Got a lot of things sort of percolating here in regard to our Oyster Tour and our Maryland Crab Cake Tour, presented by the Maryland Lottery. We have the Gold Rush Sevens doublers to give away on the 13th of August when we return to State Fair in the Ville. We'll also be at Fadley's when the Cheatstros come to town next month. But a whole bunch more crab cake tours at Coco's, at Costas, at Pizza John's. We're going to be down at Cooper's for the Oyster Festival in September. So we're really excited about a lot of things we're doing around here. I am Nestor. He is Luke. One thing we're really doing around here is covering baseball and football like nobody else. We're BaltimorePositive.com.